Masechet Baba Kama Daf Yod Aleph. We saw yesterday the halacha that the carcass in an accident belongs to the nizak. So if I kill your ox, so you keep the carcass. And that means that I don't have to pay the entire amount of the animal, but only the difference between the value of the live animal and that of the dead animal. Now, when we evaluate the animal, we go by the time of the accident. Now, animal carcass is naturally going to depreciate over time, and so the loss of that depreciation is borne by the nizak, by the owner of the victim ox, and therefore it makes sense to evaluate it's an interest of the mazik to evaluate that worth immediately so that he can get the higher worth, and this is a benefit to the mazik. Because otherwise, the mazik would have to pay the entire. If you say that the mazik keeps the ox, the carcass, then, well, yeah, he keeps the carcass, but then he has to pay the full amount, no matter what. And then, in that case, the cost of the depreciation will be on the mazik. Okay, so yesterday we saw the opinion that the carcass goes to the nizak, but now we're going to say, Lema pechat nebela tana'ehi. Perhaps this seems to be subject to a machloket between two Tanaim, the question of who gets the loss when the carcass depreciates. The Tanya, im tarof yitaref yebiehu aed. This pasuk is talking about a shomer sachar, and if something happens to the animal that he's watching, so it says if a wild animal comes and kills it, so he has to bring a witness. Now, there's two opinions about what this means. Tanakama says, Yavi Edim shenitrefa be'ones upatur. The Shomer Sachar should bring witnesses that happened beyond his control. Even a Shomer Sachar, who's getting paid to watch, if he's negligent, then he's responsible. But if something happens that he could not have foreseen and was beyond his control, then he's patur. So that's what it means. He should bring aed. That means literally witnesses, and then he does not have to pay. That's Tanakama. Abba Shul omer yavi aduda lebetin. Abba Shul says no. The word ayed here does not mean a witness. It actually means a carcass. Now, where do you see that it means that? Look at this pasuk in Yaakov's blessing to Binyamin. It says ze'ev yitraf. Binyamin is like a ravenous wolf. Baboker yochal ad vela'ereb yachalek shalal. In the morning he eats ad. Well, based on context, if he's like a wolf goes and kills sheep, and so this would refer to a carcass of a sheep that he is eating. So we see here that ad means a carcass, and that's what it means here also. And therefore, according to Abba Shaul, this refers to the Shomer Sachar, who brings the carcass into Bet Din. Now, why would he want to bring the carcass into Bet Din? Because he wants to get it evaluated immediately so he can take off that price from what he has to pay. So, my la behakami palge, de mor savar pechat nebela de nizakave, or mor savar de mazikave. So it seems that their argument is based on this very question, where Abba Shaul, the second opinion here, thinks that the deduction of the diminishing value of the carcass, that loss is sustained by the nizak. Meaning that the nizak owns the carcass immediately, and therefore the mazik only has to pay the difference. That's why the mazik, in this case the shomer sachar, will bring it into Bet Din as soon as he can to show, look, here's to get a higher value so that he doesn't have to pay that amount. And that would leave about the Tanakama. Tanakama doesn't say that. And so he doesn't have to bring it into Bet Din. So therefore he doesn't bring it to Bet Din because it belongs to the mazik. Once the mazik has it, that means that the mazik has to pay the full amount of the ox, no matter what. And he keeps the carcass. He could do it with the carcass whatever he wants. He can feed it to the dogs. And it doesn't matter for him to bring it to Bet Din because he doesn't have to get it assessed. He just owns the item itself. And so, is that true? Is this subject to machloket? We'd rather it not be so because we seem to be following the opinion as nizak above. And we saw many opinions that follow that. So la de kula alma de nizak. No, in fact, both opinions in this braita agree that the diminishing value that loss is borne by the nizak. The only difference between the two opinions is whose responsibility is it to go through the effort of retrieving the carcass to bring it to court to be appraised. And indeed, we can support that this is in fact the subject of the machloket. This is a subject to a machloket between Tanaim from the following Braita. The following Braita only has one opinion, but it's quoted as Acherim Omrim, which implies that there is a Tanakama that is arguing about this. So Acherim Omrim, Minayin she'al ba'al habor la'alot shor mi boro, Talmud lomar kesef yashib li ba'alav vehamet. How do you know that the owner of the pit, that he's the mazik, he's responsible for hauling up the ox from his pit, the dead ox or injured ox, because it says the dead ox in this case, because it says that he has to pay to the owner, and he also has to give the carcass, vehamet. In fact, vehamet is part of the next part of the phrase, but we're reading it as if this word is part of the beginning of the phrase. We're just moving the comma from here over one word. And so then it says, vehamet, so the owner of the pit has to pay and also give the carcass. So that means that it's his responsibility to haul it up and give it to the nizak, but in fact the carcass belongs to the nizak. That's what Achirim Omrim, and that would mean that according to Tanakama, the mazik is responsible for going and hauling it up, and then he still keeps it. But he's the one that has to bring it up. So it's only a question of who's responsible to pay for the tow truck to get the injured, damaged car to safety is the question. But everybody agrees that the carcass will be owned by the nizak, and therefore the longer it stays, the longer one waits, that it will be the value will be diminished, and the diminishment is while it's under the ownership of the nizak. Okay, so Abaye asked Rava, this that we answered here, that we're talking about the effort to haul it up. What exactly is the case? If we're talking about a case where when the animal's inside the pit, it's worth only 1 zuz. But if it's outside the pit, then it's worth 4 zuz. In other words, if you were selling such an animal, you could get a better price when it's outside of the pit, because then whoever's buying it can easily haul it away. If I'm going to sell it while it's inside the pit, then that's going to come with a lot of work for the person who buys it. He would only want to pay 1 zuz. If that's the case, then the mazik, the owner of the pit, it's in his own self-interest to haul it out, because he's going to diminish the value of the carcass from what he ultimately has to pay. So therefore, if he leaves it in the pit and says, okay, you take it, then he can only diminish 1 zuz. But if he goes through the trouble, it is some trouble, and to haul it out of the pit, but then he can deduct 4 zuz, it will be worth his own while to do it. And therefore, we wouldn't need a pasuk to teach me that the mazik, that's his responsibility to take it out. He would want to do it for his own self-interest, if that would be the case. Therefore, I must be talking about a different case. Amar le, la siricha debebera shavya zuza, ve'aguda name shavya zuza. No, we're talking about a case where it's worth a zuz both inside the pit and at the edge of the pit. We're talking about a case where people are not going to pay a different amount, whether it's here or there, it doesn't matter. They're just going to pay for the value of it, and they're not considering delivery charges, retrieval charges. That's all not included. Or included in the price or not included in the price, that the price will not make a difference where it is. And therefore, the mazik would rather just leave it alone and you retrieve it, and therefore you need a pasuk to tell me that the mazik has to, according to that opinion, or not, according to the other opinion. Now we ask, is there ever a case where something will be the same value no matter where it is, whether it's in a convenient spot or inconvenient spot? In teha amre inashe, kashura b'mata bezuzah, kashura b'dabra bezuzah. Yes, as the common folk saying says, a beam of wood in the city sells for a dinar, and a beam of wood in the field also sells for a dinar, even though it's more valuable in the city, because otherwise you have to pay for transportation fee. But the point is, when we're living in an age of free delivery, so it really doesn't matter where it is. You're going to pay the same amount whether it's there or here, and the delivery costs will be borne out by the buyer. Will just have to bring it to wherever he is. So yes, there are such cases. Okay, good. Amar Shemuel, en shamin lo lagana velo lagazan ela lanizakin, v'ani omer af lashoel v'aba modeli. Shemuel says that this law that we are going to evaluate the item that was killed, or if it's, let's say, a vessel and it was broken, that's only for cases of damages. If I cause damage to something, an animal or a vessel, then we evaluate how much the broken vessel is, or the carcass, and that's deducted from the amount I have to pay. That's only in cases of damages. But we do not, and that's where we have to appraise it to see how much it's worth. But we do not appraise in the cases of a thief or a robber. If I go and I steal an animal and then I kill it or it dies, so I keep the carcass, or if I steal your vase and I break it, I keep the pieces of it, and I have to pay the full amount, right? This is an added fine that we give to a ganav and the gazlan, that he shouldn't get any benefit from it, the benefit of having said, oh, well, you keep the carcass, you have to deal with it, you deal with diminishment, or you have to go retrieve it and sell it. Nobody wants to deal with that. So a ganav and gazlan is worse than a damager, and therefore the ganav and gazlan, he keeps the broken parts of it, and therefore we don't have to bother to appraise it in Beit Din, because they have to pay the full amount. That's what Shemuel says. And Shemuel says, I'm going to add something else, even a borrower. If I borrow your lawnmower and then it breaks, so that also we do not appraise it, but rather I have to pay for an entirely new one. And Abba is the name of Rav, Shemuel's colleague, agrees with me regarding that. Okay, now we wonder about this afla shoel. It's actually ambiguous. Ibaya lehu hachi ka'amar afla shoel shamin v'aba modeli, or diama hachi ka'amar v'ani omer afla shoel en shamin v'aba modeli. When he says also for a borrower, exactly what did he mean? It is ambiguous. Did he mean also for a borrower we do appraise it, and we deduct that value from what the shoel has to pay to the original owner of the item, and Rav agrees with that? Or is it continuous with what came before? In other words, in the first reading, afla shoel is going on nizakin. For nizakin you appraise it, and also for shoel you do appraise it. Or the other reading is afla shoel is going on en shamin, right? So we do not appraise for a thief or a robber. They have to pay for the entire thing. And also shoel, and Abba agrees with me. So we're not sure what Shemuel meant by this. So let's try to answer it. Tashema. Tahu gavra de sheil narga mechabre tebaram. Atale kamederav amar le zil shalim le nagra me'aliyah. Shmamina en shamin. We have a case of a guy who borrowed an ox from someone else. That's the shoel. And he broke it. And they came to Rav for the ruling, and Rav says you have to pay him a whole new axe. So therefore we see that, in fact, we do not make an appraisal. The borrower is same as a thief. He has to pay for an entirely new one. And so since it says Rav agrees with me, so you see that's what Shemuel also meant. Okay, that seems to be a good proof. But then we reject that. It says, Adrabah, midamri le Rav Kana v'Rav Aseh le Rav. Dina hachi v'shatik shema mina shamin. In that very story, afterwards, Rav Kana and Rav Aseh told Rav, is that really the law that he should pay for a new one? Well, we should evaluate the value of the broken axe, and he should only have to pay the difference. And Rav was quiet; he had no answer. And so we take that to mean that he agreed. He says, oh, you're right, I made a mistake, and that's not the law. So that means a borrower, in fact, we do appraise it, and he could deduct that value. And so that in fact is the correct understanding of it. Itmar, Amar Ula, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Shamin laganav elagazlan. And so Ula gives a final halacha, in the name of Rabbi Elazar, we do a praise for a ganav and a gazlan. Rav Papi Amad and Shamin. Rav Papi agrees with what Shemuel said and said, no, we do not appraise for a ganav and gazlan. And V'hilcheta, and the final ruling, the anonymous Talmud says, and Shamin, lo la ganav and lo la gazlan, halacha is in fact like Shemuel, that we do not appraise for a thief and a robber. Avala shoel, Shamin, kederav Kana v'Rav Aseh. But for a borrower, we do appraise, as Rav Kana and Rav Aseh said, and presumably as Rav in fact agreed to. And so that's the final halacha. Okay, this statement here was said by Ula in the name of Rabbi Elazar, and now we're going to go on a long tangent. Once we quote one halacha in the name of Ula, we're going to quote 6 more for a total of 7 halachot on various subjects, all in the name of Ula. So here is that was the first one, here's the second one. Ve'amar Ula, ve'amar Rabbi Elazar, Shilya sheyaseta miksata bayom rishon, miksata bayom sheni, monin la min harishon. First, a little background to this halacha. A woman who gives birth to a boy is tameh for 7 days. If she gives birth to a girl, she's tameh for 14 days. This tumah is not only if she gives birth to a healthy live baby, but even if she has a stillbirth or a miscarriage, also she is tameh for that amount of time. If it's early on and it's not clear whether it's a boy or a girl, we're machmir and we assume that it's 14 days. Okay, now we're dealing with a woman who gives birth to a placenta, and there probably is a fetus inside. And here's the issue: the half of the placenta, or some of it, comes out of her on the first day, and some of it on the second day. Let's say it's around sunset, and so it partially emerges on the first day and partially on the second day. When do we start counting? So Ula rules that we start counting on the first day. In other words, we assume that there is some of the fetus, enough of it, in the placenta, that part of it that came out on the first day. So she already starts counting she is already tameh on that first day. Now, Amar le Rava, ma datach lechumra? Rava asks Ula, what's your opinion? Are you trying to be machmir by saying, listen, we don't know if the majority of the fetus was in it and came out on the first day or on the second day, so let's be machmir and we'll make her tameh from the first day? Hold on. Chumra date lidekulahu dekametartla merishon. But your chumra at the beginning of the counting is going to lead to a kula, a leniency at the end of the counting, because if you start counting from the first, then after 14 days, she'll already be tahor. She goes to the mikvah on that 14th day, and then she's tahor after that. But who knows? How do you know? Maybe the majority of the fetus that's in the placenta actually came out on the second day. So therefore, Rava revises, Ela amar Rava, lachush chosheshet mimna la mimneya ela la sheni. Rava says, I agree with you, Ula, that you should be concerned. Maybe the majority came out on the first day, and therefore she's tameh on the first day. But in terms of counting, you should only start counting on the second day. So be machmir both ways, which means in the end she'll be tameh for 15 days altogether. Okay, good. Now, my kamash malan. What exactly is Ula teaching us by saying that we're machmir and we worry even though it's only partial after birth? We assume that she is tameh. What's he teaching us here? Then miksat shilya belo valad. He must be teaching us that there's no such thing as a part of a placenta that doesn't have a fetus inside. In other words, we don't say that if only a little bit of the placenta came out, we don't say that we can be lenient because of safek sefeka. Maybe none of the fetus is in it, and even if some of the fetus is in it, maybe it's not the majority. So we could follow that rule. So Ula comes to teach us that we don't apply that safek sefeka. That even if a little bit, part of the placenta came out, we assume that part of the fetus is definitely in there. Right? The fetus is kind of evenly spread throughout the placenta, and therefore that would only leave one safek of did the majority yet come out, or is the majority still inside? And that's why we have to be machmir. That it must be Ula's chidush. If so, well, we already know this from a Mishnah in Masechet Chulin. Tanena, Shilya sheyasta miksata asura bachila, siman valad beisha, siman valad bibhema. the Mishnah in Chulin is talking about an animal. Yes, we're comparing humans to animals in terms of the status of a fetus, and this time it's for kashrut. The law is regarding shechita of an animal. Once you do shechita on a cow, everything inside is permitted, including a fetus that's inside it. However, if the fetus partially emerged from the cow before slaughter, then you cannot eat any of the fetus, even the part that's inside. So here that's shiliyah, an afterbirth of a cow or placenta of a cow, that part of it came out, and then you slaughter it after part of it came out. You can't eat any of it, because basically a sign of a fetus and a placenta coming out is a sign of a fetus, that there's a fetus in there. And for a woman and also for an animal, the biology is similar enough that we assume that a partial emergence of a placenta also means that a part of the animal, of the fetus, also came out, and that's why you can't eat any of it. So you see that we already know from the Mishnah that partial afterbirth, we assume, has part of the fetus in it, and that's why that would be not kosher. So what is Ula telling us if we already know from the Mishnah? Answer is, Imi matnita havamina diesh miksat shilya belo valad, ugzera miksata atu kula kamash malan. If I only had the Mishnah, I would have thought maybe, in fact, the principle is that there could be a part of a placenta that has none of the fetus in it. And therefore, really, from the letter of the law, if only a part of the placenta came out of the cow, it should be permitted to eat the fetus that's inside the cow. But we only make a gezerah, because if we permit, in that case, when part of it came out, people will look at that and say, oh, look, even if the placenta comes out, you're permitted to eat the fetus. In other words, eat the fetus, as being a part of the mother, and they'll think that it's allowed even if the entire fetus comes out, but that's not true. So it's kind of confusing. So we make a gezerah. That's what I might think, but that would still rely on the principle that there can be a part of the placenta without any fetus in it at all, and the prohibition is only as a gezerah. That's why Ula had to teach us the law that he did, that in fact, no, because if you would apply that in the case of women, then you could have a sefek sefekah and say, you know what, you don't have to start counting today. So Ula's law teaches us further that there is no such thing as part of a placenta that has no fetus in it. If part of the placenta came out, then we assume that some of the fetus already came out, and therefore we have to be machmir, because it could be only just one sefek, that it could be that it's the majority of the fetus, and therefore we assume that she is tameh from the first day. That brings us to the third halacha. Ve'amar Ula amar Rabbi Elazar bechol shenitra betoch sheloshim yom en podin oto. The background to this is that if someone has a firstborn son, you have to do pidyon haben. We do it after 30 days because we want to make sure that the child is viable. There were a lot of deaths of babies within the first 30 days back then. Thankfully, we don't have to experience that anymore. And so therefore, if it dies a natural death within 30 days, for sure, you don't have to do pidyon haben, because the baby was never viable to begin with, and so there was no obligation. The chidush of Ula here is that even if the baby is killed by a wild animal within 30 days, in which case it may very well have been viable, and if it was viable, then you still owe the kohen the money, even though the child died. So I might have thought that I would have to pay, because maybe it was viable. So Ula's chidush is, yeah, maybe it was, but maybe it wasn't. And so since it didn't make it to 30 days for us to know whether it was viable or not, one does not have to give the money to the kohen. V'chen taneh Rami bar Chama mitoch shenemar pado tifteh yachol afilu nitra betoch sheloshim yom tamod omar ach chilek. And there's a braita that supports this, since the pasuk says Padot tifteh, which is added words. It means you shall surely redeem. So, yeah, you definitely have to redeem the child. Is that true? Even if it was killed within 30 days? No, because it says ach padot tifteh, and ach is a limiting word, meaning that it's only limited to a child that for sure makes it to 30 days, but if it dies on its own, or even if it's killed within 30 days, you do not have to give the Kohen the money. That was the third law. Now the fourth chidush of Ula, Amar Ula, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Behema gasa niknet bimshicha. He says a large animal, like a cow or a horse, if you want, paying for it, it does not effectuate the transaction. You have to actually do something. And according to him, the buyer has to pull the animal, actually has to move it, and then once he pulls it, then he gets it. Hold on, Mishnah Kiddushin says that a large animal is transferred by passing the reins. Even if you don't actually pull it or move it, just handing over the reins, you're handing over control. So that's this is against the Mishnah, and so how could it be Elazar Ula go against the Mishnah? Huda Amar ki haytana detanya Chamim omerim zo vezo bimshicha. Rabbi Shimon omer zo vezo behagbaha. He can follow Chachamim that say both large and small animals are acquired by pulling. He follows that. Rabbi Shimon says both large and small animals are acquired by lifting. How do you lift a cow? Go look there in Masechet Kiddushin. You could make it, walk up a ramp or something. All right, that was the fourth halacha. Fifth halacha. Amar Ula, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Hachin shechalku, masha lehen shamin, umasha benehen ubenotohen en shamin. Let's say a father dies, leaves an inheritance, and now the sons have to divide the inheritance. Now they're wearing clothing that belongs to the father. So what do you do with that clothing? Well, they have to appraise it. You have to come to court and say, people didn't have 100 different pairs of shirts and pants and things that they wore different days. They generally had, a weekday outfit and a Shabbat outfit. And so whatever they're wearing during the weekday, they would have to come to court, right? Show you're wearing a nice fancy shirt there that belonged to your father. We estimate that's $100. The other ones are wearing something cheaper, only worth $50. And so that is appraised and therefore included in the split of the inheritance, right? The one that's wearing 100, okay, that you deduct 100 from what you're going to get from the rest of the inheritance. However, what their children are wearing, the grandchildren of the deceased, we do not appraise because it's kids don't usually come to court. You have to bring every kid to court, and it's bothersome and humiliating. And so the brothers waive their rights. Listen, whatever your kids are wearing, whatever my kids are wearing, just forget about that. We're just going to agree that won't be included in the division, and so since they all agree, that's fine. Rav Papa pamim af masha lehen en shamin mashkachada bigdol ache denicha lehu de lishtamaon mile. The Papa says sometimes even what the sons themselves are wearing, we do not appraise. For example, the oldest brother, he's like the head of the family, and he's going to have to go and do a lot of business deals on behalf of the entire inheritance, on behalf of all of them, and so it would be beneficial for everyone, for all the brothers, that older brother dress really well so he can go to court or go to other business partners and have to deal with that. And since it's in all of their benefit, so they forego the rights to that clothing, and so we don't have to appraise it because the brother's like, oh, yeah, it's good that you have that fancy suit from our father, so that you can do those business deals. Now, the sixth halacha, V'amar Ula Amar Rabbi Elazar, Shomer shemasar l'shomer patur, ve'la mibaya shomer chinam shemasar l'shomer sachar de'alu ye'ayileh l'shmirato, ela afilu shomer sachar shemasar l'shomer chinam dehashta garu'eh gar'eh l'shmirato name patur, shareh masar leben da'at. Let's say I have an item and I give it to a shomer. I told him, I want you to safeguard this. Now, if that shomer, if he is going away and he can't safeguard the item, he's supposed to ask, give it back to me or ask me if he can give it to someone else. But let's say he doesn't ask, and then he gives it, right, shomer A gives it to his own friend and said, listen, can you safeguard this? And then let's say something happens to it, it gets lost or damaged or stolen. The first shomer is patur, even though he was supposed to have safeguarded himself, but he did put it in the hands of someone who is responsible, and so this happened. It could have happened under his watch also, so therefore he's not responsible. Now, this exemption applies no matter what levels of responsibility they have. for sure, if the guy that I gave, the first shomer, is a shomer chinam, was a lower level of liability, and he gave it to a shomer sachar, who has a higher level of liability, he's going to safeguard it even more. So there, in that case, for sure, the first shomer is patur, because he gave it to someone who's even more responsible. So yeah, for sure that'd be patur. But Ula says his halacha, even in the case of the opposite. I gave it to a shomer sachar, I paid him, and I said, make sure to watch this. And he's going away, he couldn't do it, he gave it to a shomer chinam, who has a lower level of responsibility to safeguard it. And so there I might have thought that the shomer sachar should be liable. Why'd you give it to someone who's a lower level? Even there, Ula agrees that's patur, because he gave it to someone who's mentally competent, and so he's not entirely negligent, even though it's true, it's a different level of liability. Still, it's not called negligence, and he would be patur. That's the law of Ula. Rava disagrees completely. Rava amar shomer shemasel shomer hayav. He thinks that if one, the first watchman, without permission, goes and gives it to another watchman, the first one is responsible. And he would say, the first one is responsible not only if he's a shomer sachar and he give it to someone of a lower level, there for sure the first one is responsible because he's decreasing the level of responsibility. He would even say, if I gave it first to a shomer chinam, and that shomer chinam gave it to someone with a higher level of responsibility, to a shomer sachar, nevertheless, I didn't want you to, I gave it to you, you shomer chinam. I didn't give it to the shomer sachar. And therefore, if something happens, the shomer chinam is liable. What's the reason for this? Damar le, because the original owner can say to the first shomer chinam, At mehemant li bishvoa, hailem la mehemant li bishvoa. The law is that shomer chinam, if it gets lost or stolen, the shomer chinam does not have to pay, but he does have to swear that he was not negligent and didn't take it for himself. So the owner can say, listen, I trust you with an oath, right? That's why I chose you, because if you swear to me, I'll believe you, and then I'll accept the loss. But that guy, even if he's getting paid, but he's not believed to me by an oath. I don't trust him. And so I didn't want you to give it to him, and therefore you are responsible. So it doesn't matter that one is paid and one is not paid. It's true, they have different levels of liability. The owner has a right to say, I trusted you, and if you give an oath, I trust you, but I don't trust that person. So that was the sixth halacha, and now the seventh and final halacha. Amar Ula, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Hilcheta Govin min ha'avadim. If you owe me money and you don't have any cash, but you do have slaves, I can collect your slaves in payment of my loan. Amar Rav Nachman de Ula, Amar Rabbi Elazar, afilu miatmeh. So Rav Nachman asks Ula. Ula is saying this in the name of Rabbi Elazar. So he asks him, did Rabbi Elazar say this halacha even if I am not collecting from you, but rather from your heirs, right? The original borrower dies and leaves heirs. I come to the heirs and say, listen, I want you to pay me back, and so can I collect from the slaves that they inherit? He says, La mineh. Ula answers, no, Rabbi Elazar did not say that. I can only collect from him himself and not from the heirs. Mineh afilu migilimad al kasfeh. Now we ask about that. Wait, from him himself? If it's from the borrower himself, well, of course I can collect his slaves. I can even collect the cloak that's off of his, the shirt off his back. I can collect anything that he has, any movables. I can collect his land, I can move it, whatever he has, he owes me, so of course I can collect it. What would be the chidush that I can collect from his slaves? Ula explains, here's the chidush, Shasa'o apotiki. We're talking about a slave that was set aside as designated to be collected in case he doesn't have any cash, and so basically it's kind of like a lien, just like I have a lien on land, and such that even if the land gets sold, if the borrower sells the land, I can go after the buyer and collect it. That's the same thing is true with a slave. If the slave is designated, apotiki, a Greek word, it's designated as a security for the loan, and then that slave gets sold to a third party, I, the collector, can go after that buyer and collect it. That's the chidush. K'deravad amarava asa abdo apotiki umcharo ba'al chov goveh hemenu. Shoro apotiki umcharo and ba'al chov goveh hemenu. Rava explains the logic. If someone makes his slave a pledge and then sells it, so the collector can go after it. Whereas if someone designates his ox as a pledge and sells the ox, then the collector of the loan cannot go after it. What's the difference? Ma'itama ha'it le kala v'ha let le kala. When a slave is designated as a pledge, everybody knows about it. And therefore the buyer will beware and they'll say, oh, I know there's a lien on it. Okay, I'm going to take it even though I know it might be collected. That's the same as land. That's why you can make a lien on land, because if you make a lien on land, there's publicity about it. Just like today, if there's a lien on land, it's registered and in the registry that there's a lien on it, so that if someone buys it, they'll know, oh, there's a lien on it, and then they'll take that into account in the purchase price and then their risk. But an ox, there's no publicity. There's a lot of oxen. I can even tell one from the other. And so there's not going to be it's not going to be a public matter that there's a lien on an ox, and then the buyer has no idea that there's a lien. It's not fair to go and take it from the buyer. And therefore the chidush here is that even though a slave is a movable thing, nevertheless it has the same laws as land. Lebatadin fak amar lehu ula hachi amar Rabbi Elazar afilu meyatmeh amar Rav Nachman ishtammetin ula. After Rav Nachman left, Rav Nachman asked about the case of orphans, and when at that point before, Ula said no, not from orphans. But then after Rav Nachman left, Ula then revealed his full cars, and he said, actually, Rabbi Elazar said one can collect even from orphans. One can collect the slave that the orphans inherited. If the father owed money and then the collector comes to the orphans, yes, they can collect even from the slaves. But he didn't want to say that halacha in front of Rav Nachman because Rav Nachman disagreed and didn't want to have a confrontation. Eventually, Rav Nachman heard that Ula said that in the name of Rabbi Elazar, and he said, Ula evaded me, right? He waited till I left and before he said his opinion. We'll see some more stories about this halacha on the next daf. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.